Today, we're going to do something pretty special. We're going inside a document that almost nobody has ever meant to see, a confidential billion-dollar government loan agreement. We're going to take it apart piece by piece to really understand what a country signs on for when it takes on a project this massive. All right, let's get right into it. What you're looking at right here is the real deal, the cover page of the loan agreement for a huge infrastructure project. You know, these deals can shape a country's economy for decades, but the actual terms, they're almost always kept under lock and key.
So that's the big question, isn't it? When a country borrows this kind of staggering amount of money, what are they actually agreeing to? What are the conditions, the risks? What's hiding in the fine print? Well, let's peel back the layers and find out.
Okay, first things first. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to get our bearings. Let's just establish the basics. Who are the key players in this financial agreement, and what are the big headline numbers we're talking about? It's actually a pretty straightforward setup. You've got two main parties at the table. On one side, you have the lender, which is the Export-Import Bank of China. And on the other side, the borrower, the government of the Republic of Kenya, with its National Treasury signing on the dotted line. And what's all this money for? Well, it's earmarked for a very specific and very important piece of infrastructure, building the Nairobi to Naivasha section of Kenya's Standard Gauge Railway, also known as the SGR. And here it is, the big number, pulled right from Article 2.1 of the contract. The principal amount of this loan is just a hair under 1.4 billion US dollars. That is a massive amount of money, and it's just the starting point of what needs to be paid back.
So, how long does Kenya have to pay it all back? Well, according to the agreement, the loan term is a full 20 years. That clock starts ticking the moment the first bit of money is sent, and it runs all the way to the final repayment date, 2 decades later. But there is a kind of buffer built into the beginning of the loan. The contract includes a 5-year grace period. Now, what that means is for the first 60 months, Kenya only has to worry about paying the interest. They don't have to touch the principal. It's designed to give the project time to get built and hopefully start generating revenue before those much heavier repayments kick in.
Right, and this is so important to understand. That $1.4 billion figure is just the principal. With any loan this big, the real cost comes from all the interests and the fees. So let's decode that part of the debt and see how it's all calculated. Now, if you go looking for one single interest rate in this contract, you're not going to find it. That's because it uses what's called a floating rate. And that means the cost of borrowing isn't fixed. It can, and almost certainly will, change over the 20-year life of the loan. So how do they figure out the rates? It's pegged to a global benchmark called LIBOR. Now, for years, this was basically the average interest rate that major banks in London charged each other for loans. It's being phased out now, but when this deal was signed, LIBOR was the bedrock for trillions of dollars in loans all over the world.
So here's how the math actually works, and it's pretty simple. The total interest rate Kenya pays is the 6-month LIBOR rate, which goes up and down, plus a fixed margin of 3%. The contract calls it 300 basis points, but that's just finance speak for 3%. Now, this creates a real risk for Kenya. For instance, if LIBOR is low, say at 1%, they'd pay 4% total. But if global markets go crazy and LIBOR jumps to 4%, suddenly Kenya's interest payment spikes to 7%.
And of course, the costs don't stop there. There are other fees baked into the deal. There's a one-time management fee of about $7 million. There's an annual commitment fee on any money that hasn't been drawn down yet. And if they're late on a payment, a penalty kicks in. A default interest of 1% gets tacked on top of the regular rate. Each one seems small, but they all add up.
Okay, so we've looked at the numbers, but honestly, beyond the math, there are these specific clauses, kind of tucked away in the agreement, that really show you where the power lies in this deal. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's start with Article 15.5. I mean, this is arguably one of the most important clauses in the entire contract. It deals with a pretty heavy legal concept called sovereign immunity. In simple terms, that's the rule that says one country can't be sued in another country's courts.
And the language here is crystal clear. It says the borrower, Kenya, agrees to irrevocably and unconditionally waive any immunity for itself or its property. This isn't just about lawsuits. It covers arbitration and even the seizure of its assets. It's a huge concession. So what does that mean in plain English? It means that if Kenya were to default on the loan in a major way, it can't hide behind the shield of being a sovereign nation. The lender could potentially seize commercial, state-owned assets to cover the debt. And we're talking about assets that might have nothing to do with the railway itself. And what if there is a disagreement? Where does it get settled and whose rules do they follow? Well, Article 15 lays it all out. The entire contract is governed by the laws of China. And any dispute doesn't go to a normal court. Instead, it goes to arbitration in Beijing, overseen by the China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Commission.
And finally, let's look at the clause that explains why it's so rare for us to even see a document like this. Article 17.7 is a very powerful, very broad confidentiality clause.
Basically, it says that Kenya has to keep everything about this agreement, all the terms, all the conditions, strictly confidential. The only way out of that is if the lender, the Export-Import Bank of China, gives its permission in writing. In effect, that gives the lender total control over what the people of Kenya are allowed to know about the deal their government signed.
So we've gone through the big numbers and we've dug into the fine print. Let's step back and look at the whole picture. What's the final balance sheet of this deal really look like for the borrower?
So let's just recap the key takeaways here. You've got a nearly $1.4 billion loan on a 20-year clock with a variable interest rate that could go up or down. To get that loan, Kenya had to waive sovereign immunity over its commercial assets, agree to settle any fights in Beijing under Chinese law, and promise to keep the whole thing secret unless the lender says it's okay.
And all of this brings us to the fundamental question that a document like this really forces us to ask. When a nation is trying to build critical infrastructure, trying to fuel its own development, there is always a balance to be struck. The question this agreement leaves us with is, what are the trade-offs a country is willing to make between progress and sovereignty? And there really is no easy answer to that.